Boot Camp. So we are back at it this week with another interactive verse-by-verse exploration and exposition into the world's greatest book, the Bible. And man, we've got a loaded session. We're going to get off into the fringe, and I mean the fringes of Scripture. And we're going to go into some dark places that, well, places you don't want to go. But we're going to go there. And if you're just joining us, we are carrying on this study of the book of Jude. Jude is the most overlooked and undervalued book in the Bible for us as far as right now in the time that we live in, because it's overlooked in the sense that it's really small. It's one chapter, it's 25 verses. It's easy to overlook it. Plus, it comes right before the main event, Revelation. So it's easy just to skip over that. It's also undervalued in the sense that probably for us, it's a extremely important book to study. The book of Acts covers the first 30 years of church history. The book of Jude covers the last 30. It covers the end time church. It covers what's going to happen. And Jude goes into detail about something that Paul, Timothy, Peter, John, and Jesus himself all talk about, that in the end times, the latter times, the church is going to fall away. It's going to be something's going to come upon that we refer to as the great apostasy. And that's what Jude is all about. So we're going to get into this. Before we do, I know we're going down this highway, but I'm going to exit off. And this is going to seem like we're going off into the back roads of rural Arkansas. But I want to take us back to the Old Testament first. And a wild, left-hand turn. We're going to go back to Daniel chapter 9. And this will make sense. Hopefully it will, as I kind of tie this together and the connection to it. But Daniel chapter 9 might be on the Mount Rushmore of all chapters of the Bible. There's a verse in chapter 9 that is considered the greatest verse in the Bible. The greatest verse in the Bible by many is in Daniel chapter 9. And when you do a study of the 25th verse, well, it's hard to argue that that is not one of the greatest verses there's ever been in Scripture. But Daniel chapter 9 deals with something called the 70th week. If you read this, by the way, Daniel is praying for his nation. His nation is struggling. And what is he doing? He's praying for the nation. And he's praying that the Lord will keep his promises. So he prays this prayer. And he is praying, and he's praying. And the energy and the intensity and the volume ramps up as he goes. And as you read the prayer, you just hear it get louder and louder and more intense. And then what happens is it's called the interrupted prayer, because he gets interrupted. He gets interrupted because God sends the angel Gabriel to give him the greatest prophecy there is. And he's going to give him a 4-verse prophecy that's known as the 70th week prophecy of Daniel. So we're not going to study this, but I want to pick one part of this and tie it back to the book of Jude, because again, Jude is talking about the end times. Daniel's 70 weeks covers from that period of time in 536 BC, when Daniel is, roughly around then. It's going to map out the rest of mankind's history, or the history for Israel. Okay, so the 70 weeks, it's 70 weeks of years. So a week of days is 7 days. A week of years is 7 years. 70 weeks is 70 times 7, meaning 490-year period. And so he breaks this down. In verse 24, he'll give the overview of the last 490 years of Israel's history. And they're not continuous years. There's 483 years, pause, and interval, space of time, and then the last 7 years will happen in the tribulation. So verse 24 gives you a big picture overview of it. Then you get the 69 weeks of the years in verse 25. All the events that are going to happen, not all the events, but the big picture of what's going to happen in those 69 weeks of years, which if you do the math, that's 483 years. That's the verse that is considered the greatest verse in the Bible by a lot of people. And if we have time, we'll look at that. But verse 25, what I want to point out here is verse 25 covers the 69 weeks of the years. Verse 27 is going to give you the 70th week. So there's the 70-week prophecy. Verse 26 covers a period of time after verse 25, but before verse 27. It's an interval. It's a pause in the action. And that interval has lasted about 2,000 years. And we are in that interval. That interval is, you could put the church age. the church age will come to an end, and then after that will be the 7th week of Daniel. So if you look at it like this, little graph-wise, you got verse 25 covers the 69 weeks, verse 27 the 7th week. We're in this interval period where you have the crucifixion of Jesus in 32 AD. You have in 70 AD the destruction of the temple, and Israel is dispersed throughout the planet Earth. And this is going to keep going. When does the interval end? It ends with Romans 11:25, with the fullness of the Gentiles. We don't know when this is, but there will be a fullness of the Gentiles. The number of people, the number of Gentiles, non-Jews, that are going to come to faith. And it's an interesting study when you look at it, because it suggests that there is a number, and obviously God stands outside of time, so he's created the end from the beginning, so he already knows all the people who will be saved. There's already a book of life. So when that last person is saved, that's the fullness of the Gentiles, and that's when the Father looks at the Son and says, go get them. So that's going to be the end of the church age. Now, the book of Revelation, when you get into that, chapter 6 through 19 covers what happens after the church, post-church, this tribulation period of time, which is going to cover the 70th week of Daniel, dealing with the Jews. Okay, so you get that in Revelation. Jude covers the era just before then, the end of the church age, and it's going to cover something called the Great Apostasy that's going to come upon the church. And one thing we learned about in our Thessalonians study is there's kind of a sequence of events, and I'll show this. There's a great apostasy, and then a falling away of the church, falling away of the faith, and then the Spirit is removed. So we're going to study this. This is where Jude is. The book of Jude deals with that, and that's why I say it's probably one of the most significant books for the church to be studying right now, because I think we are getting close to that end line. So here's what that verse in Thessalonians says. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day, the day he's talking about is the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is that 7th week of Daniel. There's more to it than that, but it includes the 7th week of Daniel. So it's the day of the Lord. It's not a single day. It's that period of time. But the day of the Lord will not come. So the tribulation will not come until the rebellion or the apostasy occurs, the great apostasy. And the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. That is talking about the Antichrist. So the day of the Lord, before the tribulation happens, there's some prerequisites before the tribulation takes place. The apostasy must take place. That's what we just read about. The temple must be rebuilt. And so we're looking at the Temple Institute over in Jerusalem, because they are sitting on go. They're just waiting for the green light to rebuild the temple. And we know that the temple stands in the tribulation because we have eyewitnesses. John said it. Jesus refers to it. And Paul also. And the restrainer is removed. So these are all the things that have to happen before the day of the Lord happens. So I just bring it up. If you want to look at this in the order of events, we're talking about this tribulation period, or the day of the Lord. The apostasy take place, and then you get this in verse 3. That day shall not come unless the apostasy comes first. Then verse 7 of that says, only he who now restrains will do so until he's taken out of the way. The restrainer is removed. And then from there, once the restrainer is moved, then the wicked one is revealed. So that's kind of your sequence of events. So I'm going through this to give you a picture of what's coming. Jude is dealing with this one part of this, the apostasy, the great apostasy. That's what we're looking at here. So a description of what's coming upon the church. There's going to be a falling away. We learn about that. Timothy says there's going to be a departure from the faith within the church. It's not talking about the world. Here's what it says. But the Spirit explicitly says that in later times, some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to seducing spirits and doctrines of demons. And he is writing this letter to the church. Timothy also talks about after that they're going to be unwilling to listen to sound doctrine. It says, for the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. The people it's referring to is the church. We're not talking about non-believers. We're talking about believers. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers, pastors, reverends, preachers, ministers, to say what their itching ears want to hear. And if you want to know a pastor that's doing it right or following this right here, a teacher who tells people what their itching ears want to hear, just look at the world. Who does the world love? And that person, if they love a certain teacher, preacher, pastor, to me, that's a little bit of a red flag, because Jesus preached the word and they hated him. They murdered him. The apostles preached the word and they killed him. So if the world loves something, that to me is a little bit of a red flag. Look around. Go on YouTube. Man, there's a guy right down the road in Lakewood in Houston that the world loves. Very popular. And he says what their itching ears want to hear. Then you look around, who is the world attacking? There's a guy right up there at Grace Bible Church in Southern California that the world's been attacking for about 40 or 50 years. So you look around, if the world loves somebody, they're probably not preaching the gospel. That's the bottom line. Also, false teachers and destructive heresies, according to Peter. So it says, but there were also false prophets among the people. And he's referring to, hey, guys, back in the day, back before the church, God sent prophets. These prophets were filled with the Holy Spirit. That's how they could communicate with God. But there were false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers coming among you. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the sovereign Lord who brought them, bringing swift destruction on themselves. And we're going to get into that. So Jude, just to show you kind of the purpose of what this was, Jude was going to sit down. He was going to write a letter. It was going to be a letter of encouragement, a lot like what Paul writes, talking about, hey, this is our common salvation. That's Jude's original purpose. Jude is stopped. And in his own words, he was forced to write something else. The Holy Spirit will block him from writing his original letter. It says, beloved, talking about the church, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith. This word compelled, we looked at it, it means pressured, forced, moved upon. We hear about this in 2 Peter, where he says, but know this, first of all, that no prophecy of Scripture is a matter of one's own interpretation. For no prophecy was ever made by an act of human will, but men moved by the Holy Spirit. What this says is, this is not the opinion of Moses, the perspective of Paul, the feelings and emotions of John or Peter. No, these guys were moved upon by the Holy Spirit. This moved, pressure, force. That's what he's talking about when he says, I felt, I was going to write to you about our common salvation, but I was pressured to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was one for all entrusted to God's holy people. Why did he write it? Okay, so the Holy Spirit forces him to kind of write something else. Why? Verse 4 gives you the why. It says, for certain men whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. They are godless men who change grace of our God into a license for immorality and deny Jesus Christ, our sovereign and Lord. These men have secretly slipped in among you. And so that's what we're talking about when we looked at Timothy, about they're going to bring in seducing spirits and doctrines of demons into the church. That's the point. Jude deals with this, the falling away of the church. It's going to come in the, quote, latter times. When is that? We're not sure. We don't know when the great apostasy occurs. We don't know what specifically it is. We just get a description of it and know that in the end times, it's going to happen to the church. And it might already be happening. So what happens after that is Jude gives us 3 examples of 3 different groups of people who all became apostate. They knew the truth at the beginning, and they became apostate, and they're going to experience corporal punishment from God. And that's what he's setting you up. We're going to get into the great apostasy and what's going to happen. But he's saying, let me look back here. Here's 3 different groups who all knew the truth, and they all become apostate. And here's what God did to them. And he's going to use that as an example as we get later into the chapter. So verse 5 was about Israel. We covered that last time. Verse 6 was the angels that sinned. We're going to look at that tonight. And then next week will be Sodom and Gomorrah. 3 different groups of people. You have the saved, the angels, and then we're going to say Sodom and Gomorrah was the unsaved, the world. So 3 groups that all become apostate. So verse 5, look at this as, though you already know all this, I want to remind you that the Lord delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who did not believe. He delivered them out of Egypt. And you can go back and watch the session from last week and ask yourself, was Israel saved? All those people, those 2 million people that died in the wilderness, they were saved out of Egypt. They're named my people, but they didn't enter the promised land. Where are they? They're wandering in the wilderness. And the question you want to ask yourself is, well, they were saved out of Egypt. They were called my people, but multiple times by God the Father, but they didn't get into the promised land. Where are they right now? Heaven or hell? It's only 2 choices. And that's a great study. You can go back and watch the session we did last week. Because why? Paul talks about that. The wilderness wanderings is for our benefit, the church. Okay, so that brings us to verse 6 here. The fallen angels and a world gone wrong. This is a wild ride we're about to get into. So remember, he just got to talking about Israel and the wilderness wanderings. Now he's going to use a second example. It says, and the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their own home, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. So first off, who are we talking about? Talking about angels. Well, angels abandoned their home and they're now in chains of darkness. Is this all the angels? Well, no, it's not all the angels. So who are we talking about here? And also they did not, their positions of authority. The positions, you can also translate this first estate, owned domain. They did not keep their first estate. Where were they placed? And you go back to, Genesis chapter 1, there was the heavens and the earth and the hosts of heaven and all that. They didn't stay where they were supposed to be. And they abandoned their own home. And that home is translated also their proper dwelling, the place they belonged, their proper abode. And these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. And the great day is that day of the Lord we're talking about. There's going to be a judgment for the angels, just like there's a judgment for mankind. So here's what I want to do here. Let's ask a couple questions and see if we can't answer this. When does this take place? When did they abandon their proper abode, their proper place to live? When did it take place? Who are these angels? Is it all the angels? And what lessons does the Holy Spirit want us to take from this? This is here, Jude is writing to the church. He's given 3 examples for the church to learn. So why do we need to know about something that happened to fallen angels thousands upon thousands of years ago? That's a question I want you to ask yourself as we go through this. So let's go here first. Peter also makes reference to this, these fallen angels. And he gives us a little bit of insight into this. It says, for if God did not spare the angels when they sinned. So now we learn not only do they abandon their proper home, but they sinned. And that could be one and the same, but they abandoned their home and here they sinned, but sent them to hell. And that word hell is not, it's not Gehenna, the Greek word for what we refer to as hell. It's Tartarus. It's a different place. It's not the hell we just translated in English into one word, but there's different. They're in some place, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about that. Putting them into gloomy dungeons to be held for judgments. The angels that sinned, whoever they are chained in some place right now, waiting to be held for judgment. They're in jail waiting for their sentencing. Who are these angels? Well, anytime we talk about this, let's kind of get some categories of the hosts of heaven. We know there's different kind of groups of them. If you're going to do any kind of study of angels, you got to start with the main guy, right? Lucifer. So he's an angel. But there's also these fallen angels that we're talking about, the angels that sinned. So we're going to have a group of them, but we know there's also good angels. There's also this word that's going to come up called the Nephilim. Who are the Nephilim? And second, what's the difference between angels and demons? Are we talking about demons here? So we're going to try to fill in the gap here and answer some of these questions on this. So let's start with the big boy here, Lucifer. Isaiah 14 gives us a really cool insight into the career of Lucifer. And it talks about Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. If you want to know more about Lucifer's backstory, how did Satan get to where he is now? These two will kind of get to, we won't read all of it, but I'll read this part. It says, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. Interesting that he was known as the morning star. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. Speaks to his power, prominence, and position, and now he's been cast down to earth. You said in your heart, and here comes these famous 5 I wills that Satan said. I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. That was his problem. That's what got him fired. That's what got him kicked out of heaven. That's what got him cast down to earth. His I will be like the Most High. And by the way, his followers say the same thing. Now, when you get to Ezekiel 28, you get another description of this rise and fall of Lucifer. It says, your settings and mounting were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub. Now, we kind of think of cherubs as these little babies, right? But that's not the case. A guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. He was given a certain position of promise. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. He's going to talk about the mountain of Eden. And when you read this, Ezekiel 28, you can go back and read the whole chapter. It's very interesting because the Eden he describes isn't exactly like the Eden that we think about in Genesis chapter 2. It's a little different. And so I wonder if there's a spiritual aspect of Eden, because the way they describe Ezekiel 28, this Eden and the descriptions of it and the different stones and everything is very similar to what we read about in Revelation at the end when the New Jerusalem comes down. And the description of the New Jerusalem is very comparable to this Eden in Ezekiel 28. And so I wonder if when he says, I will make all things new, a restoration of all things, that the New Jerusalem will be restored, not just back to the Garden of Eden, but to something else. So that's a whole other study. But anyway, it says, you were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. So you read Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28 are interesting in this regard also. They will both start off talking about a king, an earthly king, an earthly man. But it'll shift to the power behind the throne. In this case, Satan. All right, let's go one more place here to look at Lucifer, because this is, you can't really understand Satan fully until you get Revelation chapter 12. So it starts off like this. It says, a great sign, this is John writing this down. It says, a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. Now, what is that? Let me just say this. People get confused on Revelation. You need to understand that Revelation is all written in code, but the code is explained elsewhere in the Bible and usually in the Old Testament. So if you don't fully understand the Old Testament, you don't get what Revelation chapter 12 is talking about. It really connects the whole Bible together. It's the culmination. In this case, this woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. This is explained back in Genesis. It's explained in Joseph's dream that he had with his mom and dad. He talked about the sun and the moon would bow down and the 12 stars, referring to the 12 sons, Jacob's 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. This explains what this is. And so you'll learn about the woman here. This is verse 2, says she was pregnant and she cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. So who is the woman? We talked about the sun and the moon and the 12 stars. Who's the woman? Well, your reference to this is the entire Old Testament, which Israel is described as a woman. A lot of people try to force this into being the church. The church is the woman. No, that's wrong on multiple fronts. Number one, the church doesn't, she's about to give birth to the Messiah. That's who this is. The man-child will become the Messiah. The church doesn't give birth to the Messiah. The church didn't give birth to Jesus. Jesus married the church. We're his bride. Second, we're always described in the New Testament, all the way through, it's consistent as the virgin bride of Christ. This woman's pregnant and she's about to give birth. So definitely not the church here. So she's about to give birth. She's in pain. Verse 3 tells us, then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. You'll learn who the red dragon is if you don't already know, just a few verses later where it will say the dragon is Satan. So we know who Satan is. The woman is Israel. The dragon is Satan. And she's about to give birth to the Messiah. Okay. Now, what's all this about 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns on his heads? This is all explained back in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8 with his prophecies. So you can kind of do a study of, these are basically governments, nations, kings. I'll let you study all that, but you see what's going on. Satan and the world empires are watching the woman who's about to give birth to the Messiah. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. So here's where we learned that Satan took a third of the angels with him. So they're all cast down to the earth. The dragon, what's he doing now? The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth. Why? So that it might devour her child the moment he was born. Now, what is this all about? This is all explained back in Genesis chapter 3. The fall of man, that's sin. What happened? What was the consequence of it? This is where God proclaimed a declaration of war against Satan right then. What did he say? That woman you deceived, the seed of the woman will crush your head. In other words, her child will destroy you. From that point forward, everything in Satan's agenda was to stop the messianic line, was to prevent the Messiah coming. Why? Because the Messiah would, quote, crush his head. So the dragon, Satan, is standing in front of the woman, Israel, trying to prevent the Messiah from, he's going to try to destroy. Does that make sense? So this verse right here, the 4th verse of chapter 12, is basically one verse, one paragraph that explains the whole Old Testament. Because you can look at the whole Old Testament as Satan trying to stop the Messiah. It's all the way through. Go to Eve's first child, Abel. Cain rises up, anger, Satan's influence, kills him, takes him out. But then she has other children, right? She has Seth, and they populate. Pretty soon, then we'll learn about the fallen angels, was to corrupt all mankind, destroy all of mankind. But then the flood. And then you get into the line of Abraham, and it just track all the way through there. Satan's attack on the messianic line. Pharaoh, demonic, puts out an order. I want you to slaughter every single Jewish baby boy, every Hebrew boy. Tries to wipe them out. One little boy escapes. And that repeats all the way through the Old Testament, all the way through. You get it even into the book of Esther, where there's a government plan to wipe out all Jews. Even when you get to Jesus as a child, as a 2-year-old, Herod wants to wipe out every baby boy under the age of 2. He slaughters all of them. One little baby boy escapes down into Egypt. And so you see this line. I mean, it's all the way through of, you can really summarize from the garden to the cross as this verse, Satan watching the woman, looking for the Messiah in order to devour the man who's born. Verse 5, she gave birth to a son, a male child who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And this is another throwback to the Old Testament that we won't look at, but it's talking about the messianic line. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. What's that sound like? Snatched up to God. If the child is Christ, snatched up to God, that would make sense. It's the ascension, right? Okay. There's some other theories out there. I don't know which. I've always assumed this was just he ascended up to throne. That's where he is. He's at the right hand of the throne right now. Other people see this in a different way. They see this as the rapture, that Christ and the bride are snatched up to God. I mean, that's just something you kind of look into. It says the woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Now, this 1,260 days, it is the most detailed period of time in the entire Bible. Sometimes it's known as 3.5 years. Sometimes it's referred to as 42 months. Sometimes 1,260 days. It's all the same. It's this 3.5-year period of time known as the Great Tribulation. In the Old Testament, it's referred to as the time of Jacob's trouble, the worst period of time in human history for the Jews. Time of Jacob's trouble, Jesus called it the Great Tribulation. It's the same period of time. It's these 1,260 days that's going to come in our future. And the Holocaust killed 1 out of 3 Jews on planet Earth. During this period of time, it will be 2 out of 3. It will be worse than any other period of time. It's at the promise. Worse than any other time in human history. So worse than anything that's happened before. Then war broke out in heaven. So while this is going on earth, war breaks out in heaven. Michael and his angel. Michael is the archangel. And you'll find that there's 3 archangels, super angels that we know about. Billions of angels, but you've got Michael, Satan, Gabriel. And Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. So they're fighting against Satan. This should give you some perspective here, because we always think about Satan on one side, Jesus on the other, battling for our soul, so to speak. No. There is no war of Satan versus Jesus. Jesus created Satan. This is a tank versus an ant. This is nothing, okay? Michael, they're created beings. Michael's a created being. Satan's a created being. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. So here's the war in heaven. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. So Michael, the archangel, defeats Satan. So just to give you perspective of that. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to earth, and his angels with him. So who are these angels here? So Lucifer, if you want to study him, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, Revelation 12 is your keys to that. What about the fallen angels? Genesis 6 is where you start with. It's a world gone wrong. It says, now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God, the B'nai Ha Elohim, sons of God, referred to as angels, when those angels, a specific group of them, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. This is where we get this expression that they left their first estate. We know they can appear as men. They saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they choose. Sons of God, B'nai Ha Elohim. You do a study of this. All throughout the Old Testament, it's always referred to as angels. People try to make this to be human men. No, this is the angelic realm. The ones that we read about at the very beginning, Peter talks about, are in chains of darkness. The angels that sinned. These, we believe, is what he's talking about. This is sinful. They were cast down to earth. They appeared as men, seduced women. They had wives for themselves, whoever they choose. It gets worse. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. And this is where we get the decline of the ages down to less than 120. But here you get this, verse 4. It says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Pre-flood here, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those who were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Man, that 4 verse right there. Who are the sons of God? Who are the daughters of women, of men? And what in the world is going on? When I mentioned at the top, we were going to get into some fringe, wild stuff. This is it. You're talking about this. This goes, by the way, the Nephilim. We'll come to this in a second. But I want you to understand this, what we're talking about, is all throughout our culture. Every nation, every civilization has had this same story. Scripturally, it's the fallen angels. But other groups have co-opted that and used it. Greek mythology. What was it? The gods came down on Mount Olympus, and they came down and they seduced human women, and they had children. These offspring of gods and women were what was called the Titans, the giants. You get this even in modern days with Thor. God who comes down, falls in love with a mortal woman, with an earthly woman. So this is all throughout Greek mythology. Also, Roman mythology has the same thing. But you could do a whole study on that, and you can. I mean, there's so many theories and interpretations of it, but it's pretty clear what we're talking about. But I'll take you just to verse 9, because this kind of explains the point of what the flood was. You can't find 1 in 10 people, Christians, who could tell you why God flooded the earth. They'll say, well, they were drinking and getting drunk and partying. We don't do that today. Times 10. No, this is it. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. This word, perfect, refers back to his genes in his DNA. He was not sinless, but stainless in a sense. What we're talking about through the flood, there was these fallen angels, hybrid, the giants that we'll talk about. And he was pure. He was a purebred, maybe one of the last ones, and no walk with God. That gives you the point of that. So I'll let you do your study. If you want to study more about this, here's where you begin. Genesis chapter 6, Jude chapter 6, 2 Peter 2:4, which basically talks about the fallen angels, what they did. Jude's going to talk about how they're in prison. Peter's going to also give you more insight into that. There's other verses, but that'll kind of give you a beginning point. All right, what about the Nephilim? So the Nephilim were on the earth in those days before the flood, but they were also there afterwards. What are these Nephilim? The Nephilim, most believe that these are this weird offspring of fallen angels and human women. Okay, they gave birth to the giants, the mighty men of old, the men of renown. Okay, so you get this even after the flood, though, the Nephilim, because you remember the story where they send out the 12 spies to go spot out the promised land, 12, one from each tribe. The 12 scouts come back. Two of them, Joshua and Caleb, says, let's go. Let's do it. Let's take the promised land. 10 of them say, no way. We can't. Why? And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. They're saying that there were these extremely large humans, people, whatever, that they were giants and they were grasshoppers in their sight. We do get this. There is, if you want to do a conspiracy story study, man, they have got evidence of skeletons throughout the centuries that they have excavated that are not like normal height of men. You see the far left here is present day man at 6 feet. You got him at 15 feet, found in Turkey in the 1950s. In the 3rd century, you got one of the Caesars found one at 8'6". We know Goliath was 10'6". And Goliath was a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. He wasn't even as big as some of his predecessors. King Og, the king of Bashan, who had a 13-foot long bed, and he stood at 12 feet. 1577 AD, they discovered a 19'6" skeleton. In France, 1456, they found a 23-foot one. Also in France, a 25'6" and one at 36 feet. So look, they're there. There's a whole story about how they find them. They take them to the government. And suddenly these no longer exist. So you can do your own study in that. But this is the connection of this is the offspring of a marriage that shouldn't have happened. So you got that. You can study Genesis 6, Numbers 13, and 2 Samuel 21 gives us a great insight into that also. Demons, we're not going to cover that because we did that back at our session we did on angels and demons and what the difference is between the two. It's a biblical study of the supernatural and the unseen world around us. But to give you perspective of what angels are extremely powerful beings. They can take on physical form, which is why they could marry women. I mean, we've seen them, they eat, they can take people by the hand, they can wrestle with people. So we know that angels are legit. Demons seem to be powerless except they want to inhabit someone. And if you want to learn more about this Genesis 6, you can get this, especially these angels they are geocentric. They appear to be somewhere under the mantle. This is what happened during the flood, but they were thrown down into this place called Abaddon, Tartarus, the pit, the grave, and that's where they're at. So again, 2 Peter says, for God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, Tartarus, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. So all that comes back to Jude 6, which is talking about this in terms of the great apostasy. And he used in verse 5, Israel and all about Israel, how they become apostate. And now he's using these fallen angels as a point. This is going to set us up for us understanding how we, the church, are going to experience apostasy. And he's using this, the fallen angels, who kept not their position of authority, but abandoned their own home. These he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. So let's kind of see if we hit some of this. When does this take place? Apparently, we presume this is Genesis 6, pre-flood. And this calls God to wipe out the world through the flood. Who are these angels? Well, these are not demons, although they may result in them. That's a whole different discussion. But these are the fallen angels. And it's probably not we talked about Satan swept a third of the fallen angels. It's probably not a third of them. I mean, there are still bad angels here running around right now. We know that. So we know there's the good angels, there's the bad angels. This is a small segment of the bad angels. We don't know how many there is, but this is the fallen angels, but specifically not just the fallen ones, the ones that sin by marrying women. Now, what lessons does the Holy Spirit want us to take from this? This is something we're going to have to answer as we move along through it, because again, he's giving examples of what happened in the past and what God did to them to explain what's going to happen to the church. And next week, we'll get into verse 7. He'll use one more example, and that's Sodom and Gomorrah as example of apostasy and what God did to it. So we'll kind of try to answer that. So what I want you to do next week is we're going to cover verse 7 of Jude, but I want you to read Genesis 18 and 19. Sodom and Gomorrah. God is going to deal with apostasy, and you know how it ends up. But ask yourself, why does the Holy Spirit want you to know about this ancient city that got destroyed thousands of years ago? What is that lesson? Because the Holy Spirit says that Genesis 18:19 is for your understanding. What happened to an ancient city is for you to understand. And that's what we're going to do next week when we cover the next session of Bible Boot Camp. Until then, Romans 8:28.